right. So first, just a reminder, there's the exit door is at the back, and then also here, we're expecting a few more people, I think, so we're going to leave the back door open. Please check your phones or your mobiles are turned off. And just a reminder that the washrooms are at the back, out upstairs and also downstairs. All right. Hello, everyone, and also to the our audience on YouTube. My name is Bronwyn Wilson, and I'm the director of the Center for 17th and 18th Century Studies and also the Clark Memorial Library. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the Stephen A. Cantor Lecture on California Fine Printing. Before introducing Tia Blassingame, I want to acknowledge the Gabrielino Tonga peoples as the traditional caretakers, land caretakers of Tovangar, the Los Angeles Basin and South Channel Islands. As a land-grant institution, at UCLA, we pay our respects to the Hanukve Tam, the ancestors, the Hihiriram, the elders, and the Eyu Hinkum relatives and relations past, present, and emerging. I also want to thank my wonderful colleagues at the Center in Clark who've made this event possible, especially Anna Chen and Nina Schneider. There are many others in the library, and also Jeanette Levere, Eric Bowman, and Laura Clennon. So now to the Stephen Cantor Lecture on California Fine Printing, and it is a real pleasure to introduce our speaker. Tia Blassingame is a book artist, printmaker, curator, and educator exploring the intersection of race, history, and perception. She is proprietor of Primrose Press, and she is associate professor of art at Scripps College, where she teaches the book arts and letterpress printing and serves as director of Scripps College Press. One of the reasons we wanted to invite her is that we were particularly, we have great admiration for the social relevance, impact, and creativity of her work. Her initiative to bring more diverse perspectives together through the book, print, artist, scholar of color collective she founded, and through her work at Scripps College, guiding future book artists. Utilizing printmaking and book arts techniques, she renders racially charged images and histories for a nuanced discussion on issues of race and racism. Blassingame holds a BA in architecture from Princeton University, a master's in book arts from Concord College of Art and Design, and an MFA in printmaking from Rhode Island School of Design. She has been a teaching artist at the National Building Museum, Smithsonian Institution, Glen Echo, Pyramid Atlantic, and the University of Maryland at College Park. At the Smithsonian Museum of American History, she served as the image coordinator for race and ethnicity in advertising for the project America, 1890 to Today. She's also been an artist in residence at many locations at Yaddo, Santa Fe Art Institute, the Andy Warhol Preserve, the International Print Center in New York, and McDowell Colony, and printer in residence very recently at the Bodleian Libraries. Her artist books and prints can be found in library and museum collections around the world, including the British Library, the Library of Congress, the Rijksmuseum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Tate Britain, the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and the State Library of Queensland. In 2019, Blassingame founded the Book Print Artist Scholar of Color Collective, which has over 40 members, to bring Black, Indigenous, and people of color book artists, paper makers, paper engineers, letterpress printers, printmakers, and children's book illustrators into conversation and collaboration with scholars of their culture's book history and print culture to build community and support systems. Blassingame also co-curated Paper is People, Decolonizing Global Paper Cultures, an exhibition for the Minnesota Center for Book Arts and San Francisco Center for the Book with Stephanie Sauer. And then in 2022, with Ellen Sheffield, she curated the exhibition Troubling Artists' Books That Enlighten and Disrupt Old Ways of Being and Seeing, and that was at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art. Her creative practice marries time in the reading room handling historical documents and time in the studio working with typefaces, ink, paper, paint, and dyes in order to develop artist books that help readers and viewers connect to history. The title of this counter lecture is Our Histories and Futures, Making New Print and Book Arts Work Within Libraries. Please join me in welcoming Tia Blassingame.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Good. Okay, excellent. So I am delighted to be here. I'm going to try and get myself situated, so bear with me. I'm delighted to be here, to be invited to share some of my book print work, talk a little bit about teaching as well. So today what I'd like to do, and try to keep myself on time, so bear with me, is I'm going to talk about or present 4 components of my practice. So research, library acquisitions or intentional collecting, teaching, and then commission work. And so I'll show some of my artist books, prints, some student work, and then close by sharing or maybe debuting some recent commission work by Book Print Collective members. So I'll start with research. And I'll start with a project that came out of research that I was doing for multiple artist books kind of at the same time, looking at the business records of the Brown family of Providence, Rhode Island, connected with Brown University, dating from 18th century, that was conducted at the John Carter Brown, and bear with me because I'm flipping through too much. The John Carter Brown Library. If you've heard me talk about this work before, I would say that being able to handle the material was extremely important to multiple projects, artist books that I worked on out of this research, partly because I was looking for indicators, but knowing that I wanted to look at this specific history, but not sure how I was going to turn it into a print or a book. So looking for indicators, how does it smell? How does it look? How does the light shine through it? What sound does it make? How does it feel? What is it eliciting in me emotionally? And so from that came harvest, holding, and trading. The piece that I'm showing here is actually on an alternative unique version. The edition version is sort of like a cacophony of different screen printed colors. This actually removes a lot of that. So it's sort of minimal color, but the same imagery and text. So text, in this case, coming from a receipt. It might be also coming from a count book, at times coming from original text, coming from emotions that it elicited in me. Here's another accounting. And in this case, showing screen printed text and image, the text coming again from a receipt. Moving forward, part of the documentation or text from one of the accountings. And I'm going to kind of keep moving forward. Another piece that I've brought with me, Unbound, for you to take a look at. And if you haven't worked out from my bio, I seem to like very wordy, nice long titles. one day I will learn because I have to actually say them myself. So this is a piece that I'm going to show next is Slavery's Historic Signs, Providence, Rhode Island, and Providence Plantations. So kind of coming out of this same research. So as I was trying to kind of decipher the account books, try to locate information, specifically names, names of enslaved peoples, also people in the town, recognizing names in the documentation that I was also seeing on the house signs for historic houses as well. In this case, sort of taking what had been kind of index cards during my research, where if a name came forward of an enslaved person, I was writing that down, any kind of information I could get. Sometimes it was a name, sometimes there was no name. At times it grew to multiple different facts about a person, sometimes very sketchy, to create sort of an alternative family tree for the Brown family. So I brought the fabric cyanotypes with those alternative house signs on them. So in this case, it's a fabric scroll, 176 inches. So allowing you to kind of walk along the length of this family tree, in many ways kind of replicating my own kind of walk along Benefit Street past these different historic houses. So again, with the names and some fact that I have about them, in this case, sort of shifting the name that would be on the sign for the historic house, which would typically be the white male of the house, to giving that last name, giving them the last name, and presenting their first name almost as the owner of the house, but at least acknowledging their occupancy. And I'm going to keep moving to work in progress. So some work that I don't have, but I have brought work that's part of the series. So I had the great good fortune last fall to be a printer in residence at Bodleian Library, University of Oxford. Bodleian has a bibliographical press, so letterpress, different typefaces. So the image that you see is outside of the studio. Lots of tour groups. For me, it was interesting. Probably 20, 30 something years ago, I was on one of those tour groups with a class. So you see the door of the studio, a lovely letterpress print noting a lecture that I was going to give. And I'm going to just pause to say, all the slides, or majority of the slides, you're going to see my face, another artist's face, and their name. I know for me, I tend to kind of hide a little bit, and I'm sort of overemphasizing, but also to sort of place that person and that name with their work and their efforts. So get used to my smiling face. So one of the projects that I worked on during this residency was a handbook. So I've been working on a series of handbooks utilizing paste paper, original text, letterpress, digitally printed. And so working on the next part of that series, I brought Black a handbook, which is the work just before this one for you to look at after the talk. This piece is still a work in progress, so maybe this will get me fired up to kind of get over the hump. So you see paste paper drying, me working on some paste paper with the proofing press behind me. Working in the Bodleian's letterpress studio was exciting, humbling, a little surreal, because you have the Radcliffe camera right outside the window, which for me was really kind of amazing and inspiring. And part of this project, I had worked on across the year last year. And at this point, during this residency, I had kind of lost track of the color scheme, or was starting to question my decisions related to the color scheme. And I'll get back to that in a minute. I had a few chances during this residency to give talks, but also the opportunity to look at material in the Weston Library that's part of the Bodleian Libraries. And so to look again at plantation account books, in this case, in Barbados. And so it had been a while since I'd done that similar work that I started with at Brown. And so kind of reacclimating myself into that effort of deciphering and learning how to read the material. I think, maybe as I'm getting older, maybe kind of coming out of the pandemic, this time around, the sort of emotional toll of looking at that work was greater than I had experienced in the past. And so that was something that I hadn't factored in a similar way. And so trying to kind of move between making work in the studio that's kind of messy, and then being in the space with these materials that are from the 17th, 18th, 19th century, deciphering, looking for names, having, working through those emotions when you're finding the names. They're accounting books, so they're not warm and fuzzy. And what does that mean when they're just a list of people, kind of like cattle, like produce, right? And so that was very challenging, I found. And so I think that's, to some extent, part of why this is still a work in progress. So you see example of a page spread of one of the plantation accounting books. I'm sure also as I'm getting older, my eyesight is quite challenged by this in a way that it hadn't been previously. So one of my presentations at the library, staff was kind enough to pull some of the work that I was reviewing. And so it was my first chance to actually have some of the archival materials together with some of the paste paper that was very fresh. Some of it's still kind of curled. And this for me came at a point where I really was questioning my ideas around the color scheme, even though everything around me was sort of an indication that this is the color scheme. The paste papers, the archival pages, the surrounding stone buildings are all sort of this similar shades of cream and kind of honey that I had been sort of thinking about, and I think internalizing so much that I had actually questioned it. So really the chance to have it all together was actually sort of a huge kind of blessing for me in the process. I want to move on to teaching. And I know I have a lot to get through in a limited time, so I might kind of jump a little bit. So spring 2017, 2018, 2019, I taught a seminar class that kind of every time I taught it, I was maybe trying to hone in a little bit more of what I was trying to do and maybe learning from it. So the title sort of shifts slightly every time. In this case, it's a seminar class, but I always thought, like, who is actually going to approve this class? They're going to recognize what I'm doing. It's really a studio class masquerading as a seminar class or the other way around. So each time it's sort of shocking that it was approved and moved forward. And so we did a lot, we had a lot of work to do in this seminar class. For the first half of the semester, we were housed or kind of embedded in our Denison Library. So that's the library on Scripps College campus, has book arts collection. And it really gave us a chance to do kind of something like radical, which is read artist books. Not just look at them and think like, this is cool, this is pretty, all the bells and whistles, but actually read them, learn to see them, to critique them, to learn the techniques that artists who work in the book farm are utilizing and how you respond to them and how you might use them in your own work. Students also exhibited the work. So they sort of curated an exhibition, installed the work. At times we did that in Denison, also in the consortium, shared library Honnold and their special collections. Throughout the semester, we were sort of embedded in Denison, but we also visited special collections in Honnold. Also, another special collections that's in Honnold Library is the Asian Library Special Collections. And then also working with library staff for students to learn how to properly exhibit work. How do you do that without damaging work? We also worked with the Digital Humanities Institute that's part of Honnold. They helped us. So all of our effort for these seminar classes, we were also building a website. So helping us with metadata and sort of building out the sites. And then sort of halfway through the last half of the semester, we moved to the letterpress studio, so Scripps College Press. Majority of students, these are all undergraduate students, majority of students are not art majors or minors. So getting kind of a crash course in how to safely use proofing presses, typesetting, making lino cuts. We used cut vinyl, pressure printing to explore social justice topics that they were passionate about, and then sort of finding inspiration or sort of lessons learned from the work that either they had curated in the show, had presented. Also, students interviewed artists, librarians, collectors, and bear with me. So sort of those years of the seminar class have been put together on one site. So you have interviews. Exhibit really doesn't give you sort of images of the exhibition. You know, it's more of students sort of writing about the work. There might be a few that might have some imagery, and then portfolios. So in this case, and all students, you know, were asked to kind of write about the process of making, if there was someone or some book or artist they interviewed or something across the semester that inspired them in some way. So you have images of work, and then a brief write-up. It may also show you who they interviewed. So in this case, excuse me. So this is Syrian refugees print. So starting with linoleum block print. So there's the carving. sort of sketching, kind of thinking about what they're working on. This piece is by Emma Scott Hagel. She's a Scripps College student who's graduated in 2021. She also was one of the interviewers of printmaker Jesse Goldstein, part of Occuprint. And she mentions drawing inspiration from Philip Zimmer's Reaper, and I'll just quote her. I decided to focus my print on a Middle Eastern topic, the Syrian refugee crisis. In the fall of 2016, I spent 2 months in Camini, Italy, working with refugees coming into the country from Mediterranean Sea vessels. My work focused on integrating newly arrived refugee families into Camini city and culture. And then here's her print. And I'm going to keep moving forward. So this is another piece, Gender Inequity. And this is by Athena Mouthuli, and she's a Scripps student, class of 2022. So you see some of her prints kind of in process on the drying rack. In her project, and I'm going to quote her again, I'm trying to convey that there is a major difference in the way male and female athletes are described. So the figures are the absence printed out of some cut vinyl, the text handset letterpress. And I'll continue quoting her. I wanted to convey a powerful message about gender inequality, specifically in sports. So her piece in process. So you see the sort of cut vinyl on the press bed. Mixing some ink, and then that final print. And Athena was one of the students who interviewed Donald Russell, who is a curator at George Mason, and then also executive director of Provisions Library, which is now Provisions Research Center for Art and Social Change. I'm going to sneak back to this if I can. So I think for me, I feel like the most impactful or important part of this seminar, aside from us doing probably too many things, was really from the start giving students just the time to read the work and to learn how to handle the work, think about how they were going to share the work with one another, to describe it, to walk us through it, but really to sort of just have time to be quiet and sit with the work was really important. And I think also to be within the space of the library and to make that kind of familiar to them and their home and have them sort of have ownership of that space, I think was very important. I felt like of all of the sort of book arts classes that I've taught, these students seemed to be the most sort of knowledgeable about the work and able to critique artist books in the interviews, ask smart, very challenging sometimes questions, but then also to be able to critique one another's print work later in the semester in a way that was quite smart. And, not to sort of shy away from critiquing. And then website, but for time, I'm going to keep going. So I want to talk a little bit about intentional collecting. So in 2021, I received the John N. Chester Fund Purchase Award for the purchase of some of my publications from the University of Illinois Chicago Library. And I would say that for me, that was huge. And I think I'm still sort of experiencing kind of like the effects from that. Some of the items that were acquired through that award were a love story, which is kind of my love story to, or love letter to the book arts field that you see here. Gun Shy, which was actually kind of like a pretty mock-up, as we would say in grad school, of an artist book that was edition. In this case, it has all of the form and the content, but I had finally sort of moved forward in my decisions around the text, which is handwritten. A piece that I had created, again, edition, past, present DC, that came out of research that I had done at Library of Congress using their set of green books, and also a similar sort of travel guide for African-American travelers. In this case, the acquisition was of, the photolitho plates, etching plates, proof prints, handmade paper samples, a print that's part of another kind of work in progress, No Human Being, which is pressure prints, You Are, another pressure print self-portraits with letterpress captions. Some early prints from letterpress prints to some litho prints, which litho is kind of like my heart, but I haven't worked on it in a bit, as well as you see some of the sort of conceptual proof prints, those cyanotypes from slavery's historic house signs. So you start to see sort of like a range of material. Colored a handbook, African-American a handbook. So these are part of that series that tie to the work in progress that I was working on at the Bodleian. And so, let me go back to this. So part of this purchase award, the library acquired approximately 30 of my pieces. And so to me, that's kind of huge because, beyond being sort of significant for me, that size acquisition, that institution becomes kind of a significant repository for my work, whether it's for students, researchers, etc. Okay. Now I'd like to sort of close by talking about commissioning. And I'll go through this quickly. So again, penchant for nice long titles, book print artist, scholar of color collective, book print collective is fine. The title to some extent, kind of in many ways is a lie. Really the purpose of the group is to build support systems for BIPOC artists in printmaking, printing, book arts, but also to bring them into community collaboration with scholars of their book histories and print cultures. So those scholars may not be BIPOC. And sort of what grounds us and connects us is our shared passion for book arts and potential for artist books as vehicles for social change, social unity, or racial unity, excuse me. And the part that I'm excited about is really the idea that the group can continually shift as we collaborate in different ways. For me, I kind of see almost everything as a collaboration. And as was mentioned before, we're a little over 40 members strong. So a little bit of background, I'll talk about our most recent kind of commission, which I'm very excited about. So in 2022, Penn State Eberly Family Special Collections Library invited a few collective members, myself, letterpress printer Ben Blount, Tamar Evangelista Doherty, to serve as the man junior lecturers in the book arts. And then after that talk, they approached us about commissioning some work. And we all said, sure, but we wanted actually to invite at least one other collective member with us to kind of round out the conversation and the project. And so we decided to invite Hanji maker Amy Lee. And so we have this commission project that involves a little over a year of our regular conversations, explorations, conversations around race, identity, belonging, visibility. And it really comes out of something that I had mentioned in a conversation with Tamar, which she referenced in her lecture, which was kind of the sort of start of the pandemic when we were locked down and I was teaching online and kind of driving myself crazy, spending far too much time creating demonstration videos. Because I felt it was very important, even though I wasn't going to be in the same room with the students in our lovely print shop together, that they at least see my hands making, and particularly that they see Black hands making. And so we sort of took that as our kind of loose topic for the project. And I'll just kind of read Tamar's quote kind of around the project. Ben Blount, Tia Blassingame, Amy Lee, all hands of color, all artists of color with their hands engaged in artistic expression and social change through book arts. The affinity for craft and method for each initiates a threshold for extraordinary power. So I'm going to go back a little bit. So last year, this year, we have a total of 6 collective members, myself included, that are doing 2-week residencies at Halden Bookworks, which is a book arts center run by one of our collective members, book artist, papermaker Radha Pandy, and her partner, Johan Solberg. And so you see my nice scowling face representing my 2 weeks there. Below you see an image of the print studio. In this case, we are actually being paired with artists from an Indian collective. So, each collective member actually represents kind of a pairing. So last year we had 3, I was the 3rd. This year we'll start up again with another 3 pairs. So when this residency came kind of in August, we had been meeting for 8 to 9 months, kind of talking around our focus. We had decided on sort of a print portfolio. I had an idea and had sketched these hands and kind of wanted to talk about what I think about a lot when I'm making work. But I wanted to kind of test it out on a smaller scale. So these prints are letter size, The text, I make these for Black people. You don't need to see my hands making to feel that I take the pain and triumph and spin gold. So proof prints on a variety of different papers, polymer letterpress for text, as well as the hands. So it kind of gave me a lot of information. Wasn't exactly quite satisfied, but it's something that I was able to sort of bring with me a little bit later to the residency at Oxford. So all of the prints are a larger scale, so 10.5 by 15 3/4 inches. So you see the first layer, which is a pressure print, just to get some texture down. One of those two hands, the background. There's a proof. This is the second hand, the little rainbow roll printed with that lovely Radcliffe camera in the background. The second layer of that hand coming from my initial sketch, letterpress printed, and you start to see kind of like the mid-range of this incomplete print. And of course, mixing up some good inks. So here again, so to my right for this right, you see that polymer plate on the press bed of the sketch, inked up with that nice rainbow roll. So probably trying to test out my colors. Closer to me, you see the piece printed. So it was nice to finally, after having tested it out, that second hand with the final layer of the polymer sketch on top, to finally see it sort of coming together. Little typesetting. Always fun to typeset with someone else's typefaces. My hands with the hands on the print, printing that text. Here you have the text form inked up. So I kind of knew from that first version that I had done at Halden that probably the text was going to change, which it did. And this is the finished print. So now the text reading, we work in silence, we work in song, hands conspicuously black and brown, printing histories, binding lineage, together, evident in silence and in song. So instead of being just one person myself, bringing at least two people together in sort of the creation of a artist book. So I'm going to come back. So this print portfolio includes 3 prints. So the first you've seen by myself, the next is by Ben Blount, with writing by Tamar, which you're hearing some of or seeing some of now. The power of the printed word, richly mediated by letterpress, all place brown hands in book arts in the texture of narrative, the context of imagination with contemporary struggle and cultural identity. So you see above on the slide, the image you've seen of me typesetting the word Black. The larger image is coming from Ben Blount's print, his lockup of the text, "Show me your hands." So Ben's piece starts with a sketch of hands, building up. And I'm going to go ahead and read some of his text. "Show your hands" features overlapping drawings of open hands that are letterpress printed from polymer plates. The overall color palette is various shades of brown, including the paper and the printed text, "Show me your hands." The text has a dual meaning, referencing the visibility of artists of color, as well as the troubling history of police interactions with Black and brown communities. It's a call to action and an exploration of ideas of access and what it means to truly be seen. So you see the finished print. I'm going to go back to Tamar. The equations presented by book arts are never easy. Global lace bark traditions and Korean hand papermaking, the visibility of artists of color and police interactions in Black and brown communities. So you see up above the third layer of Ben's print. And closer to me, you see Amy Lee working on a sheet. So Amy's print is called Spreading Bark. So from mixing pulp to mixing in some dye, mixing the dye, pulling sheets, pressing sheets, the finished sheet. Again, back to Tamar. The choreography, and we'll sort of pause in the kind of the middle of the process of making Amy's print. The choreography of raw materials and shared otherness is framed by a commitment to create works that carry relevance, challenge practices, confront bias, privileges, and constantly seek to resonate with relentless curiosity. And now I'm going to quote Amy as we continue looking through her process of making this print. "I wanted to replicate the feeling of spreading a piece of cooked bark between your hands, how satisfying it is." And so we see some of the pieces that she's inking up. This is the back of a piece printed. "How satisfying it is to see the natural crisscross of paper mulberry bast and how far it expands past its original width." So we see her pulling that test print, and here we see the prints drying. And continuing from Amy. "Various names for bark cloth, bark lace, and other substrates made from the inner bast of plants by people worldwide, mostly from the global south, for thousands of years." So we see her screen for screen printing with the sort of handwritten different names, hands as well. Screen printing. I think she had someone helping her with screen printing. Farther from me in that image, you saw some of the prints being printed. Here are the prints drying. And this is the finished print. So you see those original pieces that she was testing, as well as the hands. You can kind of pull down that central piece very carefully to sort of detach them from the thumbs that pull up as well, to see where she signed and additional information as well. So some of the names: Amato, Amate, Kappa, Tapa, Lace Bark. The three prints together, again from Tamar. "The prints within this work come to us as complete and immediate narratives of the artist." So this is kind of like my first sharing of this suite of prints, which is super weird and exciting and stressful and everything like that. So this is sort of like the inaugural print portfolio, or kind of conversation around this subject matter. As I said, that subject matter is kind of a little amorphous and broad, allowing everyone different ways in. We're actually starting next week to meet about this year's print portfolio that will involve different members of the collective. I kind of see this project as a nice way for members to get to know one another. Our membership is kind of across the country, in Norway and in Egypt. And so many know one another's work, some do not, some know one another, some do not. And I thought it would be an interesting thing to kind of work on this project and have conversations around kind of challenging subject matter that I think we're all struggling with and kind of thinking about as a different way to kind of connect to one another. And also kind of have a sort of long timeline. Another thing that we're doing, so the first one was commissioned by Penn State Special Collections Library. Future ones may or may not be, but the participants, sort of will start, the collective will give them a sort of nominal honorarium, materials fee, and then as sort of editions are sold, ideally in an ideal world, they'll receive a percentage of that sale. So instead of, I think, like a typical print portfolio, you're asked and you're invited, you're excited, you send your prints, edition of prints, you get one copy of the whole edition, which is great. It sells. You may or may not have any information later about where it goes, and you definitely receive no money. So this is something that I'm looking to kind of keep going every year, kind of for as long as collective members are interested in and available to participate. And so once it finishes together, that sort of series will be a nice conversation as well. So there we are for initial. Closer. Thank you.
My questions? Yeah, okay, that's great. So thank you for a really wonderful talk. I found it so compelling to think about the relationship between the hand of the artist and about the imprint and how that's connected to thinking about touch in relation also to visibility. So there was something about kind of seeing it unfold through the whole presentation that I'm really grateful for. I'm sure people have questions. I just wanted to say also before, I'll walk around with a microphone so that people who are listening on YouTube can also hear your questions. But afterwards, Tia has put out some of her prints that are in the book room, so you can actually take a look at them with her. So we'll wind up a few minutes early for that. And then also because I don't want to forget to invite you afterwards to the reception, which is across the lawn in the North Range as well. So I'll get the microphone, but please, question?
And I'll also be putting out the 3 prints from the print portfolio that I closed with. So,
Tia, you mentioned the journals from the slave trade in Barbados, and you mentioned the green books.
Mhm.
And I've heard a bit about the green books, but I've never actually seen images of them. Can you discuss what they look like and
Sure.
if there are any extant? Thank you.
sure. Yeah, it's funny because typically I would sort of, as my way of like introducing myself in my work, I usually start with Harvest Holding and Trading, the original version, and I show some images from the Green Book. So, but to me, it just looks like, if you're familiar with AAA guidebooks that kind of don't exist anymore, right? So for each state, major cities, it would list out basically the places that were safe for Black travelers to stop. So restaurants, for housing, because for most places, they were not going to be accepted. And so the travel guide was kind of for, I feel like the Green Book was kind of for like a business traveler. The travel guide was kind of like a little bit fancier, maybe for a slightly wealthier kind of leisure traveler. But sort of giving you kind of like basic information, as it gets into like late 50s, 60s, Green Book might also include kind of like legal information for you as well. Yeah. And actually in past, present DC, I kind of sort of like create reconstituted pages from the Green Book.
Now that reminds me of the safe houses for the Underground Railroad. Were there any printed pamphlets for the Underground Railroad?
That is not part of my research focus, but now I'm like, maybe it is right now. I can't imagine that it would have been printed. But maybe, but I doubt it. But see, now I'm like, let me work on 8 books at the same time, and maybe one is about that.
Hi, Tia. Thanks for a great talk and congratulations on the commission portfolio. I actually had a question about your, I guess, process with students. When you said that they spend like the first half of the semester in the library, how does that work? Are they assigned like subjects? Or are they just like, go for, whatever thing that you're interested in? Do you guide them? Do the librarians guide
Sure.
them? And just sort of how do they get acquainted with what's available in the
Sure.
library?
So there definitely is guidance and sort of working with the librarians. And I think maybe because I've incorporated spending time and visiting special collections in kind of all of my classes, where you're sort of building a relationship as well. In this case, we're doing so many things in the seminar class. So to some extent, that kind of helps sort of focus us. Definitely the subject matter helps focus. I mean, sort of kudos to the librarians for actually like being willing to purchase artists and work on subject matter that maybe is a little challenging or what I'm kind of interested in for students. So a lot of it is sort of like, I think the first seminar class was around race and identity. And 2017 within their holdings, this is pre-George Floyd, right? So there are only so many people doing that kind of work. To some extent, it's form as well. Also thinking about, so I would reach out to artists, collectors to see if they would be willing to be interviewed beforehand. And so if we had work by them, so look at their work as well. So it's not sort of a free-for-all, but to some extent, in many cases, students get very excited and passionate and sort of becomes that in many ways, because the reading room, like they can go in, once they're in, they could pull things off of the shelf. They're all sort of there within the space, but it's sort of a mix of the things that you asked about, sort of working with the librarians, having some focus, being open to them being taken off track. I mean, because to me, that says that they're excited about this thing that they didn't know existed. But also we are doing so many things in the course. So that sort of focuses us as well. They know they're going to be curating an exhibition. And so if it's not a work that they're looking at during the course, but they have some subject matter that they're passionate about, a lot of times it's asking the librarians, do you have an artist book about X? I don't, but I have this other thing, and having that kind of a conversation. So it's sort of a mix. Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. I'm on. You did it up there.
Out of the
Okay,
ether.
all righty. Oh, good, thank you. I've just taught myself to letterpress print, right? And the thing that fascinates me, which is you're onto, I think, really well, is that you can print on anything, right? You can print on a dead tree, you can print on phone call, you can print on anything. I kind of like the idea of you making your own texture to print on.
Mhm.
Now, my question is, what's next? The one that you did at Oxford, I couldn't quite figure out from the slides what it was.
Mhm.
As paint on something. But, you know, my whole thing now that I've learned to print letterpress, especially with polymer, it's just open up this whole magical field and using the computer to transfer to a polymer. So what's your next, the question is, what's your next magical thing you'd like to print on?
I don't know if it's magical. I would like to finish the work that you saw in process at Oxford. And so, you know, that sort of like there's texture there that kind of gets pulled into the paper as it's drying, but then I'm also going back in and ironing it, which kind of burnishes it as well. So it sort of shifts it, maybe gives it a little bit more shimmer. Previous titles in that series, I also went over it with persimmon juice. In this case, I'm not doing that. Basically because when I do that with this project, where everything is sort of cream and white and gray, it becomes pink, of course. And that's not what I'm okay with. That's not what I want for this. So I don't think there's going to be anything that I'm putting over it, which I'm still kind of coming to terms with because I did want some kind of mediator. So many of the projects I kind of build in something or some things that are just for me within the process. And so that sort of like seeing the shift of texture getting kind of pulled in, color being sort of sublimated by the persimmon juice, is kind of gone now. And so like that color shift isn't happening. It's not getting sealed in just for me. I think I'm okay with that, but it's still a little bit open. I think right now, the next thing is actually not specifically like my own artwork. It's the print portfolios. Because, you know, for the next group, some of the members are not artists. You know, everyone's an artist, right? They don't think of themselves as artists. Maybe they're scholars primarily. And so, you know, they have some feelings about being involved in this and whether their print is actually an essay about this, we'll see. And so sort of moving that forward to be able to kind of continue the conversation, but also to continue this sort of community building that I think has been very challenging because of COVID. That this sort of, to me, gives a way that it is important and sort of meaningful and memorable. That I think for me, that's the next sort of like exciting, nerve-wracking, magical thing. Great.
Tia, I'm curious. Do you have ideas surrounding? Hello. Do you have ideas surrounding involving students with the collective?
I'm interested in it, but I feel like the pandemic sort of shuttled a lot of my plans for the collective and how we would get to know one another and how we would be in person and build that trust before bringing in other people into the mix. So, you know, sort of at this point, we're sort of paused at our membership number because I feel very strongly my commitment to each member. and that it is a community and that it is worthwhile for them to be part of. And we're not quite where I would want us to be for us to also bring other people in. I mean, for students, it would make sense, but I think the pandemic sort of fried a lot of things with it.
So I'm going to ask one more question, if that's okay, which is around the idea of letterpress mediating the printed image, because I was really intrigued by your comment when you picked up somebody else's dies and kind of handled those. So I'm wondering, is it something about the idea of the kind of equipment that is the thing that then becomes the process of mediation, that it's not something that is as handled, but you kind of showing yourself handling it in the photograph is part of what you're getting at by, as someone who works on 16th century books where you're always looking at letterpress, like the idea of it being mediated through letterpress was super interesting. So I just wonder if you could just say a little bit more.
So if I'm not answering your question, tell me. Okay. So I feel like part of what I started this sort of presentation with is like, you're going to see me all the time, right? And then I talked about how this sort of like visibility of particularly BIPOC artists, but I would say particularly Black artists, and then more particularly within book arts, that the sharing images, sort of increasing visibility, like completely on the nose, increasing visibility in the process, I think is so important. And I think that is a form of mediation, as is erasure of those efforts of that sort of history. So it becomes sort of like weird and shocking that there are images of, my hands as I'm putting it, like it's one word of a longer piece. Like, did it take me days? Is that the longest thing I printed? No, but there's something really heavy and important and sort of shocking. That word Black in metal that has weight, that's being, typeset by me with these hands that you're seeing. And I think also sort of taking that ownership, I think my experience is probably very similar to many other artists of color, particularly teachers of color, art teachers of color, lecturers of color, that your efforts in the process oftentimes are not documented, or if they are documented, they're not shared. So, like doing a workshop, many of my white counterparts, images of them within the process everywhere. Whereas, my BIPOC counterparts, particularly Black counterparts, maybe there's no one there to take your picture, or they just happen to miss it, or you have to take a weird selfie of yourself in the process. So I think there's that pulling of power to sort of make the visible and sort of push the mark of invisibility, and in that way having a mediation of that. And then I may have created my own question, which I often do, so please let me know.
I thought that was an amazing answer. So thank you very much. I just wanted to remind everybody, if you want to go through the North Range, you can see some of the prints, and we can talk with you further there. But thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, they're